Just turn around and leave me. The tear in my eye drops on the floor alongside my spear. My knees are drenching in the blood I spilled just to get here. When I look around me, everything I had went up in flames. My lonely way. When I look around me, everything I had went up in flames. My lonely way. I never pray to God anymore. I'd rather no one hurt me. Redemption, I have waited for you to come and drown all my sin. My knees are drenching in the blood I spilled just to get here.
All right, we'll be getting started in just a second here.
Look around me, everything I had went up in
Okay, good evening. It is time for another chapter from Homeland, the first in the Dark Elf Trilogy. Yes, I know I'm reading them backwards compared to what most people recommend, but this is the way I read them originally, so it's how I'm doing it. Everybody says you should read the Icewind Dale Trilogy because these are prequels to that. Well, I didn't read them that way. I read the Dark Elf Trilogy first, then read Icewind Dale, and I enjoyed it very much that way, so that's why I'm doing it this way. So, anyway, we are on Chapter 7. We'll see how far we get. We'll go through Chapter 7, of course, but if my voice holds out, we might even do into Chapter 8. So, Chapter 7 is Dark Secrets. Do you truly mean to try? Massage asked, his voice condescending and filled with disbelief. Alton turned his hideous glare on the student. Direct your anger elsewhere, faceless one, Massage said, averting his gaze from his mentor's scarred visage. I am not the cause of your frustration. The question was valid. For more than a decade you have been a student of the magical arts, Alton replied. Still you fear to explore the netherworld at the side of a master of sorcerer. I would have no fear beside a true master, Massage dared to whisper. Alton ignored the comment, as he had with so many others. He had accepted from the apprenticing Hunnet over the last 16 years. Massage was Alton's only tie to the outside world, and while Massage had a powerful family, Alton had only Massage. They moved through the door into the uppermost chamber of Alton's four-room complex. A single candle burned there, its light diminished by an abundance of dark-colored tapestries and the black hue of the room's stone and rugs. Alton slid onto his stool at the back of the small, circular table and placed a heavy book down before him. "It is a spell better left for clerics," Massage protested, sitting down across from the faceless master. "Wizards command the lower planes. The dead are for the clerics alone." Alton looked around curiously, then turned a frown up at Massage, the master's grotesque features enhanced by the dancing candlelight. "It seems that I have no cleric at my call," the faceless one explained sarcastically. "Would you rather I try for another denizen of the Nine Hells?" Massage rocked back in his chair and shook his head helplessly and emphatically. Alton had a point. A year before, the Faceless One had sought answers to his questions by enlisting the aid of an ice devil. The volatile thing froze the room until it shone black in the infrared spectrum and smashed a matron mother's treasure hoard worth of alchemical equipment. If Massage had summoned his magical cat to hadn't summoned his magical cat to distract the ice devil, neither he nor Alton would have gotten out of the room alive. "Well then, very well then," Massage said unconvincingly, crossing his arms in front of him on the table. "Conjure your spirit and find your answers." Alton did not miss the involuntary shudder belied by the ripple in Massage's robes. He glared at the student for a moment, then went back to his preparations. As Alton neared the time of casting, Massage's hand instinctively went into his pocket, to the onyx figurine of the hunting cat he had acquired on the day Alton had assumed the Faceless One's identity. The little statue was enchanted with a powerful dwemer that enabled its possessor to summon a mighty panther to his side. Massage had used the cat sparingly, not yet fully understanding the dwemer's limitations and potential dangers. Only in times of need, Massage reminded himself quietly when he felt the item in his hand. Why was it that those times kept occurring when he was with Alton? The apprentice wondered. Despite his bravado this time, Alton privately shared Massage's trepidation. Spirits of the dead were not as destructive as denizens of the lower planes, but they could be equally cruel and subtler in their torments. Alton needed his answer, though. For more than a decade and a half he had sought his information through conventional channels, inquiring of masters and students in a roundabout manner. Of course, of the details concerning the fall of House de Vere. Many knew the rumors of that eventful night. Some even detailed the battle's methods used by the victorious house. None, though, would name that perpetrating house. In Menzoberranzan, one did not utter anything resembling an accusation, even if the belief was commonly shared, without enough undeniable proof to spur the ruling council into unified action against the accused. If a house botched a raid and was discovered, the wrath of all Menzoberranzan would descend upon it until the family name had been extinguished. But in the case of a successfully executed attack, such as the one that felled House de Vere, an accuser was the one most likely to wind up at the wrong end of a snake-headed whip. And I'm actually going to pause very briefly. I forgot to bring my water glass in, so I will be right back. Okay. See, that's all it was. All right, and it says we have an ad starting in just under 2 minutes. So, all right. Snake-headed whip. Okay, public embarrassment, perhaps more than any guidelines of honor, turned the wheels of justice in the city of Drow. Alton now sought other means for the solution to his quest. First he had tried the lower planes, the Ice Devil, to disastrous effect. Now Alton had in his possession an item that could end his frustrations, a tome penned by a wizard of the surface world. In the drow hierarchy, only the clerics of Loth dealt with the realm of the dead, but in other societies, wizards also dabbled into the spirit world. Alton had found the book in the library of Sorcerer and had managed to translate enough of it, he believed, to make a spiritual contact. He wrung his hands together gingerly, opened the book to the marked page, and scanned the incantation one final time. "Are you ready?" he asked Massage. "No." Alton ignored the student's unending sarcasm and placed his hands flat on the table. He slowly sunk into his deepest meditative trance. Fe Inad, he paused, and cleared his throat at the slip. Massage thought he hadn't closely examined the spell, recognized the mistake. Fe Inunad Demin. Another pause. "Loth be with us," Massage groaned under his breath. Alton's eyes popped wide, and he glared at the student. "A translation," he growled, "from the strange language of a human wizard." "Gibberish," Massage retorted. "I have in front of me the private spellbook of a wizard from the surface world," Alton said evenly. "An archmage, according to the scribbling of the Orcan thief who stole it and sold it to our agents." He composed himself again and shook his hairless head, trying to return to the depths of his trance. "A simple, stupid orc managed to steal a spellbook from an archmage?" Massage whispered rhetorically, letting the absurdity of the statement speak for itself. "The wizard was dead," Alton roared. "The book is authentic." "Who translated it?" Massage replied calmly. Alton refused to listen to any more arguments. Ignoring the smug look on Massage's face, he began again. "Fe mnuna de mil de sui de kef." Massage faded out and tried to rehearse a lesson from one of his classes, hoping... Oh, we're into the ad, so I will stop there. It will be showing up sometime. It doesn't always. It doesn't always show up on my other device. So I don't know for sure if you're all actually seeing an ad. But OBS is telling me we're in an ad. So we'll give it another 30 seconds, and then it will say that we're done, and we can move on. I don't want anybody to miss out on my poor reading of the material. Where were we? Massage faded out. I'll start at Massage faded out. Okay, it says that we're back, so I'm going to start back at the beginning of the paragraph. Massage faded out and tried to rehearse a lesson from one of his classes, hoping that his sobs of laughter wouldn't disturb Alton. He didn't believe for a moment that Alton's attempt would prove successful, but he didn't want to screw up the fool's line of babbling again and have to suffer through the ridiculous incantation all the way from the beginning still another time. A short time later, when Massage heard Alton's excited whisper, "Matron Guinevere?" he quickly focused his attention back on the events at hand. Sure enough, an unusual ball of green-hued smoke appeared over the candle's flame and gradually took a more definite shape. "Matron Guinevere." "Oh, Matron Guinevere," Alton gasped again, when the summons was complete. Hovering before him was the unmistakable image of his dead mother's face. The spirit scanned the room, confused. "Who are you?" it asked at length. "I am Alton de Vere, your son." "Son?" the spirit asked. "Your child. I remember no child so very ugly." "A disguise," Alton replied quickly, looking back at Massage and expecting a snicker. If Massage had chided and doubted Alton before, he now showed only sincere respect. Smiling, Alton continued, "Just a disguise that I might move about in the city and exact revenge upon our enemies." "What city?" "Menzoberranzan, of course." Still the spirit seemed not to understand. "You are Guinevere," Alton pressed. "Matron Guinevere de Vere?" The spirit's features contorted into a twisted scowl as it considered the question. I was, I think. Matron mother of House de Vere, fourth house of Menzoberranzan, Alton prompted, growing more excited. High priestess of Loth. The mention of the Spider Queen set a spark through the spirit. Oh no, it balked. Guinevere remembered now. You should not have done this, my ugly son. It is just a disguise, Alton interrupted. I must leave you, Guinevere's spirit continued, glancing around nervously. You must release me. But I need some information from you, Matron Guinevere. Do not call me that, the spirit shrieked. You do not understand. I am not in Loth's favor. Something... Trouble, I guess. It's a typo. Trouble, whispered Massage, offhandedly, hardly surprised. Just one answer, Alton demanded, refusing to let another opportunity to learn his enemy's identities slip past him. Quickly, the spirit shrieked. Name the house that destroyed De Vere. The house? Guinevere pondered. Yes, I remember that evil night. It was house... The ball of smoke puffed and went out of shape, twisting Guinevere's image and sending her next words out as an undecipherable blurb. Alton leapt to his feet. No, he screamed. You must tell me. Who are my enemies? Would you count me as one? The spirit image said, in a voice very different from the one it had used earlier, a tone of sheer power that stole the blood from Alton's face. The image twisted and transformed, became something ugly, uglier than Alton, hideous beyond all experience on the material plane. Alton was not a cleric, of course, and he had never studied the drow religion beyond the basic tenets taught to males of the race. He knew the creature now hovering in the air before him, though, for it appeared as an oozing, slimy stick of melted wax. A Yoklol, a handmaiden of Loth. You dare to disturb the torment of Guinevere? The Yoklol snarled. Damn, whispered Massage, sliding slowly down under the black tablecloth. Even he, with all of his doubts of Alton, had not expected this disfigured mentor to land them in trouble this serious. But, Alton stuttered, never again disturb this plane, feeble wizard, the Yoklol roared. I did not try for the abyss, Alton protested meekly. I only meant to speak with Guinevere, the Yoklol snarled, fallen priestess of Loth. Where would you expect to find her spirit, foolish male? Frolicking in Olympus with the false gods of the surface elves? I did not think. Do you ever? The Yoklol growled. Nope, Massage answered silently, careful to keep himself as far out of the way as possible. Never again disturb this plane, the Yoklol warned a final time. The Spider Queen is not merciful and has no tolerance for meddling males. The creature's oozing face puffed and swelled, expanding beyond the limits of the smoky ball. Alton heard gurgling, gagging noises, and he stumbled back over his stool, putting his back flat against the wall and bringing his arms up defensively in front of his face. The Yoklol's mouth opened impossibly wide and spewed forth a hail of small objects. They ricocheted off Alton and tapped against the wall all around him. Stones? The faithless wizard wondered in confusion. One of the objects then answered his unspoken question. It caught hold of Alton's layered black robes and began crawling up toward his exposed neck. Spiders. A wave of the eight-legged beasts rushed under the little table, sending Massage tumbling out of the other side in a desperate roll. He scrambled to his feet and turned back to see Alton slapping and stomping wildly, trying to get out of the main host of the crawling things. Do not kill them, Massage screamed. To kill spiders is forbidden by the... To the nine hells with the clerics and their laws, Alton shrieked back. Massage shrugged in helpless agreement, reached around under the folds of his own robes, and produced the same two-handed crossbow he had used to kill the Faceless One those years ago. He considered the powerful weapon and the tiny spiders scrambling around the room. Overkill? He asked aloud. Hearing no answer, he shrugged again and fired. The heavy bolt knifed across Alton's shoulder, cutting a deep line. The wizard stared in disbelief, then turned an ugly grimace on Massage. You had one on your shoulder, the student explained. Alton scowled and not relent. Ungrateful, Massage snarled. Foolish Alton, all of the spiders are on your side of the room, remember? Massage turned to leave and called, Good hunting, over his shoulder. He reached for the handle to the door, but as his long fingers closed around it, the portal's surface transformed into the image of Matron Guinevere. She smiled widely, too widely, and an impossibly long and wet tongue reached out and licked Massage across the face. Alton, he cried, spinning back against the wall of the slimy members, out of the slimy member's reach. He noticed the wizard in the midst of spellcasting, Alton fighting to hold his concentration as a host of spiders continued their hungry ascent up his flowing robes. You are a dead one, Massage commented, matter-of-factly shaking his head. Alton fought through the exacting ritual of the spell, ignored his own revulsion of the crawling things, and forced the evocation to completion. In all of his years of study, Alton never would have believed he could do such a thing. He would have laughed at the mere mention of it. Now, however, it seemed a far preferable fate to the Yoklol's creeping doom. He dropped a fireball at his own feet. Naked and hairless, Massage stumbled through the door and out of the inferno. The flaming, faceless master came next, diving into a roll and stripping his tattered and burning robe from his back as he went. As he watched, Alton patted out the last of the flames. A pleasant memory flashed in Massage's mind, and he uttered the single lament that dominated his every thought at this disastrous moment. I should have killed him when I had him in the web. A short time later, after Massage had gone back to his room and his studies, Alton slipped on the ornamental metallic bracers that identified him as a master of the academy and slipped outside the structure of Sorcier. He moved to the wide and sweeping stairway leading down from Tir Brachet and sat down to take in the sights of Menzoberranzan. Even with this view, though, the city did little to distract Alton from thoughts of his latest failure. For 16 years he had forsaken all other dreams and ambitions in his desperate search to find the guilty house. For 16 years he had failed. He wondered how long he could keep up the charade and his spirits. Massage, his only friend, if Massage could be called a friend, was more than halfway through his studies at Sorcier. What would Alton do when Massage graduated and returned to his House Hannett? Perhaps I shall carry on my toils for centuries to come, he said aloud, only to be murdered by a desperate student, as Massage murdered the faceless one. Might that student disfigure himself and take my place? Alton couldn't stop the ironic chuckle that passed his lipless mouth at the notion of a perpetual faceless master of Sorcier. At what point would the matron mistress of the academy get suspicious? 1,000 years? 10,000? Or might the faceless one outlive Menzoberranzan itself? Life as a master was not such a bad lot, Alton supposed. Many drow would sacrifice much to be given such an honor. Alton dropped his face into the crook of his elbow and forced away such ridiculous thoughts. He was not a real master, nor did the stolen position bring him any measure of satisfaction. Perhaps Massage should have shot him that day 16 years ago, when Alton was trapped in the Faceless One's web. Alton's despair only deepened when he considered the actual time frame involved. He had just passed his 70th birthday and was still young by drow standards. The notion that only a tenth of his life was behind him was not a comforting one to Alton de Vere this night. How long will I survive, he asked himself. How long until this madness that is my existence consumes me? Alton looked back out over the city. Better that the Faceless One had killed me, he whispered, for now I am Alton of no house worth mentioning. Massage had dubbed him that on the first morning after House de Vere's fall, but way back then, with his life teetering on the edge of a crossbow, Alton had not understood the title's implications. Menzoberranzan was nothing more than a collection of individual houses. A rogue commoner might latch on to one of them to call his own, but a rogue noble wouldn't likely be accepted by any house in the city. He was left with Sorcier and nothing more, until his true identity was discovered at last. What punishments would he then face for the crime of killing a master? Massage may have committed the crime, but Massage had a house to defend him. Alton was only a rogue noble. He sat back on his elbows and watched the rising heat light of Narbondel. As the minutes became hours, Alton's despair and self-pity went through inevitable change. He turned his attention to the individual drow houses now, not to the conglomeration that bound them as a city, and he wondered what dark secrets each harbored. One of them, Alton reminded himself, held the secret he most dearly wanted to know. One of them had wiped out House de Vere. Forgotten was the night's failure with Matron Guinevere and the Yochlol. Forgotten was the lament for an early death. 16 years was not so long a time, Alton decided. He had perhaps 7 centuries of life left within his slender frame. If he had to, Alton was prepared to spend every minute of those long years searching for the perpetrating house. Vengeance, he growled aloud, feeding off that audible reminder of his own reason for continuing to draw breath. And that is actually the end of that chapter. That was a fairly short one, so I'm going to skip ahead here and see how long the next chapter is. I think I've got another chapter in me, but only if it's another short one. Well, now I have to get back to where I was. There we are. Yeah, let's do it. Let's jump into it. What is this? Who? What's up, Unk? I'm nobody's Unk, so I don't know what you're talking about. All right. Chapter 8, Kindred. Zack pressed in with a series of low thrusts. Drizzt tried to back away quickly and return to even footing, but the relentless assault followed his every step, and he was forced to keep his movements solely on the defensive. More often than not, Drizzt found the hilts of his weapons closer to Zack than the blades. Zack then dropped into a low crouch and came up under Drizzt's defense. Drizzt twirled his scimitars in a masterful cross, but he had to straighten stiffly to dodge the weapon master's equally deft assault. Drizzt knew that he had been set up, and he fully expected the next attack as Zack shifted his weight to his back leg and dove in. Both sword tips aimed for Drizzt's loins. Drizzt spat a silent curse and spun his scimitars into a downward cross, meaning to use the V of his blades to catch his teacher's swords. On a sudden impulse, Drizzt hesitated as he intercepted Zack's weapons, and he jumped away instead, taking a painful slap on the inside of one thigh. Disgusted, he threw both of his scimitars to the floor. Zack too leapt away. He held his swords out to his sides, a look of sincere confusion on his face. "You should not have missed that move," he said bluntly. "The parry is wrong," Drizzt replied. Awaiting further explanation, Zack lowered one sword tip to the floor and leaned on the weapon. In past years, Zack had wounded, even killed students for such blatant defiance. His blades down to What? To Drizzt's face level. What? That doesn't make sense. It kind of... There's some kind of a weird typo there or missing text. I don't know. When Drizzt came clear of the other side of the darkened globe, he looked back and saw only the lower half of Zack's legs. He didn't need to watch anything more to understand the weapon master's deadly blind attacks. Zack would have cut him apart if he had not dropped low in the darkness. There's something missing there, like more than one line, I think. Anger replaced confusion. When Zack dropped from his magical perch and came rushing back out the front of the globe, Drizzt let his rage lead him back into the fight. He spun a pirouette just before he reached Zack, his lead scimitar cutting a gracefully arcing line and his other following in a deceptively sharp stab straight over that line. Zack dodged the thrusting point and put a backhand block on the other. Drizzt wasn't finished. He set his thrusting blade into a series of short, wicked pokes that kept Zack on the retreat for a dozen steps and more, back into the conjured darkness. They now had to rely on their incredibly keen sense of hearing and their instincts. Zack finally managed to regain a foothold, but Drizzt immediately set his own feet into action, kicking away whenever the balance of his swinging blades allowed for it. One foot even slipped through Zack's defenses, blasting the breath from the weapons master's lungs. They came back out of the side of the globe, and Zack too glowed in the outline of fairy fire. The weapon master felt sickened by the hatred etched on his young student's face, but he realized that this time neither he nor Drizzt had been given a choice in the matter. This fight had to be ugly, had to be real. Gradually, Zack settled into an easy rhythm, solely defensive, and let Drizzt in his explosive fury wear himself down. Drizzt played on and on, relentless and tireless. Zack coaxed him by letting him see openings where there were none, and Drizzt was always quick to oblige, launching a thrust, cut, or kick. Matron Malice watched the spectacle silently. She couldn't deny the measure of training Zack had given her son. Drizzt was physically more than ready for battle. The cross down defeats the attack, but to what gain? Drizzt continued. When the move... What? When the move is completed, my sword tips remain down too low for an effective attack routine, and you are able to slip back and free. But you have defeated my attack. Only to face another, Drizzt argued. The best position I can hope to obtain from the cross down is an even stance. Yes, Zack prompted, not understanding his student's problem with that scenario. Remember your own lesson, Drizzt shouted. Every move should bring an advantage, you preach to me, but I see no advantage in using the cross down. You recite only one part of that lesson for your own purpose, Zack scolded, now growing equally angry. Complete the phrase or use it not at all. Every move should bring an advantage or take away a disadvantage. The cross down defeats the double thrust low, and your opponent obviously has gained the advantage if he even attempts such a daring offensive maneuver. Returning to an even stance is far preferable to that moment. At that moment. The parry is wrong, Drizzt said stubbornly. Pick up your blades, Zack growled at him, taking a threatening step toward Drizzt. Taking a threatening step forward. Drizzt hesitated, and Zack charged, his swords leading. Drizzt dropped to a crouch, snatched up the scimitars, and rose to meet the assault, while wondering if it was another lesson or a true attack. The weapon master pressed furiously, snapping off cut after cut and backing Drizzt around in circles. Drizzt defended well enough and began to notice an all too familiar pattern as Zack's attacks came consistently lower, again forcing the hilts of Drizzt's weapons up and out over the scimitar's blades. Drizzt understood that Zack meant to prove his point with actions, not words. Seeing the fury on Zack's face, though, Drizzt wasn't certain how far the weapon master would carry his point. If Zack proved correct in his observations, would he strike again to Drizzt's thigh or to his heart? Zack came up and under, and Drizzt stiffened and straightened. Double thrust low, the weapon master growled, and his swords dove in. Drizzt was ready for him. He executed the cross down, smiling smugly at the ring of metal as his scimitars crossed over the thrusting swords. Drizzt then followed through with only one of his blades, thinking he could deflect both of Zack's swords well enough in that manner. Now with one blade free of the parry, Drizzt spun it over in a devious counter. As soon as Drizzt reversed the one hand, Zack saw the ploy, a ruse he had suspected Drizzt would try. Zack dropped one of his own sword tips, the one nearest to the hilt of Drizzt's single parrying blade, to the ground, and Drizzt, trying to maintain an even resistance and balance along the length of the blocking scimitar, lost his balance. Drizzt was quick enough to catch himself before he had stumbled too far, though his knuckles pinched into the stone of the floor. He still believed that he had Zack caught in his trap, and that he could finish his brilliant counter. He took a short step forward to regain his full balance. The weapon master dropped straight down to the floor under the arc of Drizzt's swinging scimitar and spun a single circuit, driving his booted heel into the back of Drizzt's exposed knee. Before Drizzt had even realized the attack, he found himself lying flat on his back. Zack abruptly broke his own momentum and threw his feet back under him. Before Drizzt could begin to understand the dizzying counter, he found the weapon master standing over him with the tip of Zack's sword painfully and pointedly drawing a tiny drop of blood from his throat. "Have you anything more to say?" Zack growled. "The parry is wrong," Drizzt answered. Zack's laughter erupted from his belly. He threw his sword to the ground, reached down, and pulled the stubborn young student to his feet. He calmed quickly, his gaze finding that of Drizzt's lavender orbs as he pushed the student out to arm's length. Zack marveled at the ease of Drizzt's stance, the way he held the twin scimitars almost as if they were a natural extension of his arms. Drizzt had been in training only a few months, but already he had mastered the use of nearly every weapon in the vast armory of House Do'Urden. Those scimitars! Drizzt's chosen weapons with curving blades that enhanced the dizzying flow of the young fighter's sweeping battle style. With those scimitars in hand, this young drow, barely more than a child, could outfight half the members of the academy, and a shiver tingled through Zack's spine when he pondered just how magnificent Drizzt would become after years of training. It was not just the physical abilities and potential of Drizzt Do'Urden that had Zack Nafine pause and take note. However, Zack had come to realize that Drizzt's temperament was indeed different from that of the average drow. Drizzt possessed a spirit of innocence and lacked any maliciousness. Zack couldn't help but feel proud when he looked upon Drizzt. In all manners, the young drow held to the same principles, morals so unusual in Menzoberranzan as Zack. Drizzt had recognized the connection as well, though he had no idea of how unique his and Zack's shared perceptions were in the evil drow world. He realized that Uncle Zack was different from any of the other dark elves he had come to know, though that included only his own family and a few dozen of the house soldiers. Certainly Zack was much different from Briza, Drizzt's older sister, with her zealous, almost blind ambitions in the mysterious religion of Loth. Certainly Zack was different from Matron Malice, Drizzt's mother, who seemed never to say anything at all to Drizzt unless it was a command for service. Zack was able to smile at situations that didn't necessarily bring pain to anyone. He was the first drow Drizzt had met who was apparently content with his station in life. Zack was the first drow Drizzt had ever heard laugh. A good try, the weapon master conceded of Drizzt's failed counter. In a real battle I would have been dead, Drizzt replied. Surely, said Zack, but that is why we train. Your plan was masterful, your timing perfect, only the situation was wrong. Still, I will say it was a good try. You expected it, said the student. Zack smiled and nodded. That is perhaps because I had seen the maneuver attempted by another student. Against you? Drizzt asked, feeling a little less special, now that he knew his battle insights were not so unique. Hardly, Zack replied with a wink. I watched the counter fail from the same angle as you, to the same result. Drizzt's face brightened again. We think alike, he commented. We do, said Zack, but my knowledge has been increased by 4 centuries of experience, while you have not even lived through a score of years. Trust me, my eager student, the cross down is the correct parry. Perhaps, Drizzt replied. Zack hid a smile. When you find a better counter, we shall try it, but until then, trust my word. I have trained more soldiers than I can count, all the army of House Do'Urden, and 10 times that number when I served as a master in Melee Magthir. I taught Risen, all of your sisters, and both of your brothers. Both? Zack paused and shot a curious glance at Drizzt. I see, he said, after a moment. They never bothered to tell you. Zack wondered if it was his place to tell Drizzt the truth. He doubted that Matron Malice would care either way. She probably hadn't told Drizzt simply because she hadn't considered the story of Nalfine's death worth telling. Yes, both, Zack decided to explain. You had 2 brothers when you were born. Dynan, whom you know, and an older one, Nalfine, a wizard of considerable power. Nalfine was killed in battle on the very night you drew your first breath. Against dwarves or vicious gnomes? Drizzt squeaked, as wide-eyed as a child begging for a frightening bedtime story. Was he defending the city from evil conquerors or rogue monsters? Zack had a hard time reconciling the warped perceptions of Drizzt's innocent beliefs. Bury the young in lies, he lamented under his breath. But to Drizzt he answered, no. Then against some opponent more foul, Drizzt pressed. Wicked elves from the surface? He died at the hands of a drow, Zack snapped, in frustration, stealing the eagerness from Drizzt's shining eyes. Drizzt slumped back to consider the possibilities, and Zack could hardly bear to watch the confusion that twisted his young face. War with another city? Drizzt asked somberly. I did not know. Zack let it go at that. He turned and moved silently toward his private chamber. Let Malice or one of her lackeys destroy Drizzt's innocent logic. Behind him, Drizzt held his next line of questions in check, understanding that the conversation and the lesson was at an end. Understanding, too, that something important had just transpired. The weapon master battled Drizzt through long hours as the days blended into weeks, and the weeks into months. Time became unimportant. They fought until exhaustion overwhelmed them and went back to the training floor again as soon as they were able. By the 3rd year, at the age of 19, Drizzt was able to hold out for hours against the weapon master, even taking the offensive in many of their contests. Zack enjoyed these days. For the first time in many years, he had met one with the potential to become his fighting equal. For the first time that Zack could ever remember, laughter often accompanied the clash of adamantite weapons in the training room. He watched Drizzt grow tall and straight, attentive, eager, and intelligent. The masters of the academy would be hard put just to hold a stalemate against Drizzt even in his first year. That thought thrilled the weapon master only as long as it took him to remember the principles of the academy, the precepts of drow life, and what they would do to his wonderful student, how they would steal that smile from Drizzt's lavender eyes. A pointed reminder of that drow world outside the practice room visited them one day in the person of Matron Malice. Address her with proper respect, Zack warned Drizzt. when Maya announced the matron mother's entrance. The weapon master prudently moved out a few steps to greet the head of House Do'Urden privately. "My greetings, matron," he said with a low bow. "To what do I owe the honor of your presence?" Matron Malice laughed at him, seeing through his facade. "So much time do you and my son spend in here," she said. "I came to witness the benefit to the boy." "He is a fine fighter," Zack assured her. "He will have to be," Malice muttered. "He goes to the academy in only a year." Zack narrowed his eyes at her doubting words and growled. "The academy has never seen a finer swordsman." The matron walked away from him to stand before Drizzt. "I doubt not your prowess with the blade," she said to Drizzt, though she shot a sly gaze back at Zack as she spoke the words. "You have the proper blood. There are other qualities that make you a drow warrior, qualities of the heart, the attitude of a warrior." Drizzt didn't know how to respond to her. He had seen her only a few times in all of the last 3 years, and they had exchanged no words. Zack saw the confusion on Drizzt's face and feared that the boy would slip up precisely what Matron Malice wanted. Then Malice would have an excuse to pull Drizzt out of Zack's tutelage, dishonoring Zack in the process, and give him over to Dynan or some other passionless killer. Zack may have been the finest instructor with the blade, but now that Drizzt had learned the use of weapons, Malice wanted him emotionally hardened. Zack couldn't risk it. He valued his time with young Drizzt too much. He pulled his swords from their jeweled scabbards and charged right by Matron Malice, yelling, "Show her, young warrior!" Drizzt's eyes became burning flames at the approach of his wild instructor. His scimitars came into his hands as quickly as if he had willed them to appear. It was a good thing they had. Zack came in on Drizzt with a fury that the young drow had never before seen. More so even than the time Zack had shown Drizzt the value of the cross-down parry. Sparks flew as sword rang against scimitar, and Drizzt found himself driven back, both of his arms already aching from the thudding force of the heavy blows. "What are you?" Drizzt tried to ask. "Show her," Zack growled, slamming in again and again. Drizzt barely dodged one cut that surely would have killed him. Still, confusion kept his moves purely defensive. Zack slapped one of Drizzt's scimitars, then the other out wide, and used an unexpected weapon, bringing his foot straight up in front of him and slamming his heel into Drizzt's nose. Drizzt heard the crackle of cartilage and felt the warmth of his own blood running freely down his face. He dove back into a roll, trying to keep a safe distance from his crazed opponent until he could realign his senses. From his knees he saw Zack a short distance away and approaching. "Show her," Zack growled angrily with every determined step. The purple flames of fairy fire limed Drizzt's skin, making him an easier target. He responded the only way he could. He dropped a globe of darkness over himself and Zack. Sensing the weapon master's next move, Drizzt dropped to his belly and scrambled out, keeping his head low. A wise choice. So this is where, for some reason, that piece got placed in ahead of some of the other training. I don't know why. At his first realization of the darkness, Zack had quickly levitated up about 10 feet and rolled right over, sweeping his blades down to Drizzt's face level. When Drizzt came clear of the other side of the darkened globe, he looked back and saw only the lower half of Zack's legs. He didn't need to watch anything more to understand the weapon master's deadly blind attacks. Zack would have cut him apart if he had not dropped low in the blackness. Anger replaced confusion. When Zack dropped from his magical perch and came rushing back out of the front of the globe, Drizzt let his rage lead him back into the fight. He spun a pirouette just before he reached Zack, his lead scimitar cutting a gracefully arcing line, and his other following in a deceptively sharp stab straight over that line. Zack dodged the thrusting point and put a backhand block on the other. Drizzt wasn't finished. He set his thrusting blade into a series of short, wicked pokes that kept Zack on the retreat for a dozen steps and more. back into the conjured darkness. They now had to rely on their incredibly keen sense of hearing and their instincts. Zack finally managed to regain a foot. Sorry, it has a period there. It's a typo. A foothold, but Drizzt immediately set his own feet into action, kicking away whenever the balance of his swinging blades allowed for it. One foot even slipped through Zack's defenses, blasting the breath from the weapons master's lungs. They came back out the side of the globe, and Zack, too, glowed in the outline of fairy fire. The weapon master felt sickened by the hatred etched on his young student's face, but he realized that this time neither he nor Drizzt had been given a choice in the matter. This fight had to be ugly, had to be real. Gradually, Zack settled into an easy rhythm, solely defensive, and let Drizzt in his explosive fury wear himself down. Drizzt played on, relentless and tireless. Zack coaxed him by letting him see openings where there were none, and Drizzt was always quick to oblige, launching a thrust, cut, or kick. Matron Malice watched the spectacle silently. She couldn't deny the measure of training Zack had given her son. Drizzt was physically more than ready for battle. Zack knew that. To Matron Malice, sheer skill with weapons might not be enough. Zack had to keep Malice from conversing with Drizzt for any length of time. She would not approve of her son's attitudes. Drizzt was tiring now, Zack could see, though he recognized the weariness in his student's arms to be partly deception. Go with it, he muttered silently, and he suddenly twisted his ankle, his right arm flailing out wide and low as he struggled for balance, opening a hole in his defenses that Drizzt could not resist. The expected thrust came in a flash, and Zack's left arm streaked in a short cross-cut that slapped the scimitar right out of Drizzt's hand. "Ha!" Drizzt cried, having expected the move, and launching his second ruse. His remaining scimitar knifed over Zack's left shoulder, inevitably dipping in the follow-through of the parry. But by the time Drizzt even launched the second blow, Zack was already down to his knees. As Drizzt's blade cut harmlessly high, Zack sprang to his feet and launched a right cross, hilt first, that caught Drizzt squarely in the face. A stunned Drizzt leaped back a long step and stood perfectly still for a long moment. His remaining scimitar dropped to the ground, and his glossed eyes did not blink. "A feint within a feint within a feint," Zack calmly explained. Drizzt slumped to the floor unconscious. Matron Malice nodded her approval as Zack walked back over to her. "He is ready for the academy," she remarked. Zack's face turned sour, and he did not answer. "Virna is there already," Malice continued, "to teach as a mistress in Arachnilith, the School of Loth. It is a high honor." A laurel for House Do'Urden, Zack knew, but he was smart enough to keep his thoughts silent. "Dynan will leave soon," said the matron. Zack was surprised. 2 children serving as masters in the academy at the same time. "You must have worked hard to get such accommodations," he dared to remark. Matron Malice smiled. "Favors owed, favors called in." "To what end?" asked Zack. "Protection for Drizzt?" Malice laughed aloud. "From what I have just witnessed, Drizzt would more likely protect the other 2. Zack bit his lip at the comment. Dynan was still twice the fighter and 10 times the heartless killer as Drizzt. Zack knew that Malice had other motives. 3 of the first 8 houses will be represented by no fewer than 4 children in the academy over the next 2 decades, Matron Malice admitted. Matron Bainray's own son will begin in the same class as Drizzt. "So you have aspirations," Zack said. "How high, then, will House Do'Urden climb under the guidance of Matron Malice?" "Sarcasm will cost you your tongue," the matron mother warned. "We would be fools to let slip by such an opportunity to learn more of our rivals." "The first 8 houses," Zack mused. "Be cautious, Matron Malice. Do not forget to watch for rivals among the lesser houses. There once was a house named De Vere that made such a mistake." "No attack will come from behind," Malice sneered. "We are the 9th house, but boast more power than but a handful of others. None will strike at our backs. There are easier targets higher up the line. And all to our gain, Zack put in. That is the point of it all, is it not? Malice asked, her evil smile wide on her face. Zack didn't need to respond. The matron knew his true feelings. That precisely was not the point. Speak less and your jaw will heal faster, Zack said later when he again was alone with Drizzt. Drizzt cast him a vile glance. The weapon master shook his head. We have become... It cuts off in mid-sentence and goes to chapter 9. So I don't know what it's supposed to say. This is clearly a flawed Kindle version of the book. I may have to look for a better copy of it. Because it cuts off there. So, but that's the end of the chapter as far as what I can see. So we'll just leave it off there. And let's see. Who's on? Nobody's on. That's doing anything but playing D&D and Elden Ring. Yeah. Okay. Well, we just won't raid tonight. I will just see you all tomorrow night for... What is tomorrow night? Star Wars. Tomorrow's Thursday. Yeah. Star Wars reading tomorrow night. So I will see you then.
Calling to say I calling to say I